Welcome back to Lionhead Legacy, a retrospective series on the games of Lionhead Studios and its founder, Peter Molyneux. Today we're going to be looking at the movies, the last game released by the studio before their acquisition by Microsoft. Isn't it crazy that this, Black and White 2, and Fable the Lost Chapters all came out in the same year? Man, I wonder how they did financially. Huh? Pretty good. Nice. Oh no. More on that. For those of you who aren't familiar, The Movies was a tycoon simulation game where you built a lot, hired crew, staff, scriptwriters, actors, directors, and even stuntman to make films. Each aspect has a fair amount of depth, but the main gimmick, the big selling point on the box, is that you can watch your movies and you can use all these pre-made scripts and scenes to create your own little movies. They even had a service called The Movies Online to upload your little machinima on the internet, and this was right before sites like YouTube existed or even got big. Even after it was shut down and YouTube existed, I still managed to see a lot of creators using the movies for their videos. Now, for a little peek behind the curtain, this is the first video I've started writing the script for before finishing the game. And why did I do that? Well, two reasons. The first is I did an 8-hour session that my broken mouse double-clicked the record button on OBS, so 0 seconds were recorded. Genius on my part. So I wanted to replay that portion because I covered a lot of ground there, but also because it's not a story-based game, and those I prefer to have the full picture before I make the final judgment. A mediocre game can often be elevated by a great story, and The Movies has no such direct story. In any case, you don't need to beat a game to tell the story of its creation, so let's get right into the development of the movies using the tools that the game provides us to paint this picture. The year is 2002. Our source is a GameSpy article from 2004 written by our guy Peter Molyneux and lead designer for the project, Adrian Moore. Peter said that he had a sudden flash of inspiration one cold January morning. He jolted out of bed, disturbing his partner in the process with the fully formed idea of a movie tycoon. He expanded on it over several pages and came into work earlier than normally to show everyone. The reactions were so positive that he knew he was onto something. Quote, "But while it is all very well having a great idea for a game, in some ways, that is the easy part. The real skill in making a great game is having a great team, and this had to be my next step." End quote. And that is where Adrian came in. Peter had known Adrian for 14 years at this point, dating back to when Adrian was one of the testers for Populous. And he would stay at Bullfrog until '98 when he would leave for Criterion Games and later Small Rockets. Needless to say, Adrian had experience in many roles, including lead designer. Peter called Adrian up to explain his ideas, and Adrian's immediate enthusiasm was exactly what Peter wanted. Adrian put in his 2 weeks' notice at Small Rockets, and just a short month after Peter had his flash of inspiration, the movies had its first 2 developers starting work, Adrian and lead programmer James Brown. Adrian would spend the initial days introducing James to the colleagues he already knew and discussing with Molyneux and Mark Webley about the scope of the project. Adrian pitched doing a movie version of Theme Park and Theme Hospital, but Webley and Molyneux wanted increased ambition that's more in line with their ethos, eventually settling on that ahead-of-the-time feature of creating and exporting the in-game movies. Adrian would say that in the month after him and James formally joined Lionhead that, quote, "We had enlisted the services of some very talented people. Rohan Nucky joined us to work on the art, the look, and the style of the game, specifically the sets and environments. Chris White joined us to look after the character side and create hundreds of detailed costumes throughout the eras. Simon Boscaro joined us on the animation side to work with Chris to bring our little people to life. And Jean-Claude Cartier, the 3D programmer who had created the Black and White engine, came to join us from another Lionhead project. And for a little while, the 6 of us constituted the movie's team, as we fleshed out the game design and continued to recruit more people." End quote. This small yet growing team would consult with Molyneux often and were given their first deadline in September of 2002 to show off a feature that Molyneux had come up with and that Adrian was enthusiastic about at ECTS, a system of sliders that would ramp up the intensity of the pre-made scenes within the game. The example Molyneux used in Adrian's words was, quote, "an action scene outside a saloon on a western street set where a cowboy would be thrown through a window out into the street when the action sliders increased." End quote. And thankfully, we actually have footage from this showcase which shows them using the romance sliders, with the kissing and hand-holding getting more intense, with Molyneux joking that the developers went a little too extreme so he wouldn't move the slider all the way. In other examples, he showed the Western fight with an most extreme setting resulting in bent limbs. This is obviously a very early alpha, but it shows that Adrian and the team had met their deadline, and the voices you can hear that aren't Peter's seem to be, at the very least, entertained by this feature. Though I struggled to find any coverage on this particular game with any of the media coverage at ECTS that year. I believe the lack of coverage from Peter comes from the fact that he was distracted with Black and White 2 and Fable 2, which those working on the movies joked drew the Eye of Sauron away from them. By this point, the team was around 60 people, and they had issues keeping enough work on the plate of these developers due to a lack of framework. Quote, "They didn't know what they were meant to be doing next. It was literally being made up as we went along. I likened it at the time to that bit in Wallace and Gromit when they're on the train and they're laying down the train tracks ahead of the train. That was production desperately trying to give the team work to do. A team sitting around doing nothing isn't exactly a good thing for getting a game out. It was a crazy place," said Stuart White, which signaled the growing disorganization and bloat at Lionhead. By the time March 2003 rolled around, the team had secured a contract with a large publisher in Activision. With funding secured, they had made good enough progress to be giving proper previews to the press. For example, this preview at GameSpy, written by Sal Accardo, was an exclusive, and they were initially at Lionhead's GDC booth to look at Black and White 2. What Molyneux showed revealed how they had conceptually settled on the final premise of the game. You're a head honcho of a movie studio starting in the 1920s, and you have control over nearly every aspect. What sets get used, how they're dressed, what costumes are used, how happy your stars are. It's clearly a game that prides itself on the depth of its concept, and not just its cool gimmicks. Molyneux shows the previously shown intensity slider demo of the Western action scene and romance scene, as well as a new gangster 1960 set, which showcases how equipment other tech improves over time as you research it. Molyneux would, for the first time, then tease what would become the movie's online site for uploading and voting for the best movie trailers of the movies made in the game here. Molyneux would continue to show off features later in 2003 at ECTS once again, though this time he upped the ante. Instead of sharing just trailers on the site, you would be able to share the entirety of your little mini-movies on the site. This is also where they would premiere how you would have to manage your stars. Your stars will gain experience or come already experienced in certain genres. The more they practice on the sound stages or appeared in movies of that specific genre, the more experienced and better they would be in these movies. Simple enough, right? But you're not just managing how good they are, you're managing their happiness too. Peter showed how you would even have to keep actors happy by keeping their image high with clothes, plastic surgery, keeping their pockets fat with a high salary, and lavish trailer and their entourage big, or else they throw tantrums and cope with their unhappiness with multiple vices, be it food or alcohol, which delays movies and can eventually result in them leaving. Peter emphasized that the stars were the driving force of the success of your movies and could make or break profitability. And for a little spoiler for my thoughts, they definitely succeeded in most of this aspect. While this build had made huge progress on the lot management and star management side, the movie making process was the same as previous builds. Still, it was proof that steady progress was being made, but like most of Lionhead's projects, the idea that they would meet their goal of a 2004 release date seemed optimistic. Not much new progress was shown in the rest of 2003, but still, they had shown off a lot of what the game was going to be. Even with the quotes about making stuff up as they went along, this might be the most complete of a concept for a Lionhead game this far before release. And I'm happy to say that there was no existential we have to start over moment like Black and White 2. So as 2004 started, we got more and more coverage and previews of the game. This preview from GameSpy in February 2004, written by John Kiefer, is written in the format of Academy Award coverage, which is cute, where they catch Adrian Moore on the red carpet and give a studio tour, where he shows off an actor he named Tom Cruise, who is the game's idealized big star. High salary, big entourage, jumping into a trailer with a starlet, and it bounces around like woohoo in The Sims. Speaking of The Sims, the article said the game could be bigger than The Sims in its spiffy versus iffy roundup, which is a lofty expectation. Indeed, at least it wasn't Molyneux saying it this time, but Internally, they were shooting for a Sims level success, which now seems absurd. Alright, here's Peter being interviewed a month later in March. Hopefully there isn't anything too lofty in here. So far so good. Implying the game's 3 gameplay loops could be their own separate games. Star managing, movie making, and studio managing. Alright, we get it. Starts in the 1920s, stars are fickle. Peter, give me some juice. Okay, Mod Tool sounds pretty good to me for a game like this. Alright, nothing I can make fun of him for here. Damn it, Peter, you're supposed to be giving me some hype. This game just sounds realistically pretty good. This dev diary written by Cliff Harris later in the year just repeats a lot of what we heard about the actors and crew's unique personalities, but there's good eggs, bad eggs, and drunks and lovers and food addicts, and we know the drill already, but it's my job to tell you about that stuff for our purposes. A lot of this is lofty, though. Bragging about 5 gigaflops of neural processing power for each actor is some classic developer technobabble. So, as I implied, nothing new in 2004, just polishing the game to a higher standard. They had a logo competition to create logos for the player to choose from, which is cool. Oh wait, this was December 2004. I guess the game wasn't going to come out that year, huh? 2005, though, was the year, and we got the definitive previews to prove it. This one from GameSpy calls it a sim-like again, which it is. They say the user interface is simplified and usable compared to the half-finished versions of the previous builds that they had been shown, but outside of the plastic surgery feature, nothing new is really shown. But that's alright. That's enough. We're not getting anything new, and Peter isn't bragging hard enough. Guess he was too busy with Fable and Black and White 2. The game came out finally on November 9th, 2005 to a really positive reception, and well, I already implied that its sales weren't good, and they really weren't. Modern rule of thumb is if the sales numbers aren't released in an earnings call, that it probably didn't sell well. Which was very bad news for Lionhead, because Black and White 2 was also not a big seller, even if Fable was a success. They were spread too thin due to running 4 satellite studios and creating several projects at once, some of which did not come out, as we saw in another video of mine. We'll talk more about the impact to sales later, but what about the game? What do I think? Well, let's get into it. Now, I've gone over a lot of the features so far, and let me tell you, there is a lot more to this game. It's actually deep. And there's a lot I haven't covered that goes into the success of your studio as a whole. But as for the journey of a new player, we'll start off with the tutorial, which handholds you through the entire process in a slow and condescending manner like most tutorials do. And God, do I hate this tutorial. And most in games, to be honest. I get it if others find these more useful, but the difference between something like this that doesn't let you just play the game and forces you down a specific path to get the basics whenever you start a campaign, and Black and White's, which has its own smaller movement tutorial but at least lets you experiment and fail along the way, is much better in my opinion. For the second playthrough, I skipped it anyways. But luckily, the Stunts and Effects expansion pack allows you to start a game without a tutorial if you're familiar. Also, I'll include Stunts and Effects commentary as we go on, since it's integrated into the late game anyways. No reason to separate it since it integrates so smoothly and doesn't really revolutionize the game. Capiche? Let's go over controls. It's a tycoon game. You have your bottom section of the UI, which lets you choose what buildings and decorations you want to place in addition to the paths. The left side features your actors and their moods and ranks, and you can quickly switch between your actors and other employees for easy picking up and dropping. The top right portion here shows your studio rank, which you can click to get more info on what goes into it, / see your finances and adjust salaries. It's a bit clunky, but it does the job once you get used to it. A lot of your interactions involves you picking up your movies / stars and placing them where needed, but I would have preferred just more direct menus instead. It's a relatively minor complaint, but with a game that's all about micromanaging, it does get a little tedious to have to pick up every single thing to move it to the next step. The controls are fine though, and the interface is decent. They do the job, and nothing outside of a few choice mechanics are so tedious that you'll want to avoid them. Now, let's look at the lot you're given. You have this nasty dirt-filled lot in the 1920s, and you gotta build your facilities. You have one pre-built, which lets you hire janitors and builders. You build a mandatory buildings like stage schools for hiring actors, extras, and directors. a casting office where you take scripts and assign the actors, directors you want them, then rehearse and you can start filming. Of course, you need a crew facility to hire a crew, and a production office which lets you release the film, see reviews of your scripts, actors, directors, studio as a whole, and all the good stats and info in addition to setting up your finances. And lastly, for now anyways, the script office, which there are several tiers of that give you a maximum quality for your scripts. If you're doing the tutorial, you get one made for you. If you aren't, you can build the basic script office and get cooking immediately. Your first movies will suck and not do as well, and that's okay. They're cheap and profitable, so keep pushing them out while you're operating like a movie factory in these early days with a few stars. Now, speaking of stars, let's go over all of that, and we'll get one of my least favorite mechanics in the game out of the way. Relationship building. To build your relationship between your stars, you have to make them talk to each other manually over and over and over again. The relationship between them is one of the most important parts of the movie's success, and just doing the movies together doesn't push the meter up much, if at all, in my experience. So you spend a lot of time you could be engaging and fixing the lot, building new building, replacing old buildings, just forcing two people to talk. I chose to make these two my favorite match, my best director and best actress, because they could make hits, and they sure do, but eventually you hit relationship walls, and you need to place them in more intimate areas. You go from making them talk on the lot, to making them talk in a bar, to making them talk in the VIP section of the bar, and then making them talk in a restaurant, and then the VIP section of said restaurant. And by that point, both were old and almost retired, and I did a lot of micromanaging. It's not my favorite mechanic when it comes to stars. I get where Lionhead is coming from, though, because they wanted to satirize the manufactured aspects of Hollywood in addition to simulating it, but mechanically it's frustrating and time-consuming and hard to maintain more than one relationship because of that, since none really blossom on their own. Now, this is mainly important if you're trying to maximize the star ratings of your star and the movies they're in, but you can ignore it if you find it tedious and you'll still be plenty successful enough, especially if you're maximizing the other components of a star. I mentioned these traits in passing earlier, but it's important for my journey to show you that other than relationships, it's a pretty cohesive package. For example, their looks, which is their natural beauty. You can improve this with cosmetic surgery. Their physique, you can either improve with weightlifting benches set around your studio, or cosmetic surgery, of course. As well as your star's fashion, which you can manually adjust in the makeover department for better bonus, or you can do an auto makeover which takes longer but doesn't require your full attention. In addition to the aesthetic, the more famous your stars are, the more they want luxuries like a better trailer or a larger entourage. Trailers just require you to build them and place them in, easy peasy, while entourage is a more limited resource. Your studio isn't always bustling with new hires standing in line. They only come on occasion, and oftentimes you might need them for a role they're lining up for rather than an entourage that keeps your star happy. So you have to be strategic with that resource, and it may take a while to get your big star the entourage they desire. Lastly, they're concerned with salary, but that's as easy as adjusting as their star power rises. Separately, it sounds simple and easy, and together it requires a fair amount of focus to keep all your stars happy and skilled. It can be pretty fun and is what you'll be spending most of your time doing. And it's mostly pretty cohesive and interconnected, especially with the variability of star personalities and wants. Your Sims, actors, have their own personalities and desires. This mechanically displayed by these lines on the meters. If you're a low maintenance, they won't get stressed as fast from too much work or bored from not enough work. These are nice because you can train them up and groom them into better actors without them throwing temper tantrums and falling immediately into addiction. Oh yeah, your actors can get addicted to drinking and eating on set to relieve stress. You don't have to worry as much, and it's nice if they have a low maintenance personality. Other actors, like my star director on the other hand, are just full-on addicts. He's not a diva, but he has a low tolerance for addiction, and because I was developing his relationship by forcing him to drink and eat with his prospective wifey, means he was eating and drinking a lot, and once they're addicted, every time a scene is shot, they will sneak away to get drunk or eat, which of course can impact the quality of the movies and the time it takes to film them. Luckily, you can build a rehab and place them in there to fix this, but you lose the ability to use them for a year while they get better, which is why it's important to let your actors have a break between films. Not that I did, but we're a factory here, so we need to be number one. So after the guy retires, I'm making someone less addicted my manufactured A-list star. Yeah, actors and directors will retire when they reach their 60s. Sorry, Martin Scorsese, Lionhead would have retired you before you made your best work, those ageist devils. There's a way to delay their retirement though, which is to just keep casting them in movies over and over again, because they can't retire during the middle of a movie. We discussed the actors, we discussed the buildings, but not as much the mechanics of the workers you hire using them. They all have a singular skill, unlike actors, and when you hire them, they are low skilled and will progressively get better and more efficient at their tasks as the game goes on. And also, unlike actors, they don't age, so you don't have to worry about them retiring, leaving you with unskilled labor. Janitors keep your lot pretty by picking up litter and planting grass, which helps your lot rating. Builders build your buildings and maintain them, which is incredibly important because if your building maintenance falters, your movies will be of a lower quality, in addition to the risk of them totally collapsing. So it's good to prioritize having a fair amount of builders on staff at all times. Scriptwriters write scripts, the more you have, the faster they're written. Quality seems to vary slightly even with a max skill. Crew members are a necessary part of every film, and their skill affects the final rating of the movie. If you have some inexperienced crew, it won't sink it, so just push ahead. You need as many as you can for more advanced films. Scientists research these 4 categories: technology to keep you ahead of the curve, cult packs, which are genres like horror and sci-fi, which grants you new sets and costumes, mainstream packs, which are more of the same except for other genres, and stars and lot, which grants you more advanced buildings and amenities for your stars in already existing buildings. Being ahead on tech is useful, but eventually as you get closer to the end game, there's no more tech to research and any advantage you had disappears. The lot management is the third game the developers discuss when promoting the game, and it's honestly the aspect I personally cared least about, mainly because you can cheese it. It's the easiest. And yes, you can build a well-planned and thought-out lot and maximize beauty and efficiency, and you might actually get a good lot rating. But you know what else will get you a good lot rating? Just spamming 1 billion cars all over the lot without a care in the world. But to give justice to the developers, these are the things that affect lot prestige. Litter from your staff being jerks. This can be combated with janitors and waste bins. Connectivity, just lay some darn paths of the buildings and keep it consistent and you're good. A hint for path management is just laying down grass in the entire lot and seeing which shortcuts the actors are taking through the grass. When people are walking on grass, it creates dirt paths, just like real life. The ugliness and prettiness of your lot are represented by red and green glow respectively, while laying down decorations. And seriously, you can pave the entire studio with concrete, which requires no maintenance, but is bad for your rating, and as long as you just spam some cars, everything will turn green and your lot rating will be perfect. It's unfortunate it's that easy, but also with the amount of micromanaging the rest of the game requires, I'm really alright that I can cheese one function of this experience. Also, if you want your actors to be happy with their trailers without building 1,000 of the nicest ones, the cars will boost their trailer prestige too. It's so silly, but ultimately helpful. Alright, we've talked enough about staff management and lot management. Let's get to the fun stuff, the game's main selling point, the movies themselves. The movies themselves suck. There are a bunch of random scenes thrown together that usually have very little to do with each other. And that's okay. We never said you would be making real movies in here, and they have their own kind of charm to them because they're so absurd and nonsensical that they're hilarious in their own right. And that's just the movies that the script office pumps out because you don't feel like making your own. Luckily, you can make your own using all of the tools provided. When you make your own scripts, you get all sorts of scenes to choose from to create your own little concoctions, and honestly, I've seen some pretty fun and creative uses of it, especially in the game's heyday, but this recreation of the Ultimate Showdown by Lemon Demon from 2006 was always one of my favorites.
He caught his leg and he tripped. Indiana Jones took him out with his whip. Then he saw Godzilla sneaking up from behind. Then he reached for his gun, which he just couldn't find, cause Batman stole it and he shot and he missed. And Jackie Chan deflected it with his fist. Then he
There are other creators that are still around today that got their start using the movies, like Urinating Tree, who's now known more for his football content, but was using the movies to do angry retro gaming reviews back when that was all the rage in the YouTube sphere. Ah, the memories. I'm sure all of those have aged super well. Anyways, there are all these mannequins, some representing the actors in the scene who you can pre-assign if that's your jam, as well as extras that won't appear unless you ask them to because, well, it's tough to get that many extras in this game anyway. You put all these scenes together with this little structure guideline, And you can add additional set dressing as well as use that off-shown slider feature in this part of the game. And once everything is tweaked to your liking, boom, you got yourself your very own script. And yeah, you're not going to win a festival with this, but it's pretty novel and simple to use and can make some fun little results. It's no wonder this game was used so often for machinima back in the day. God, even that term makes me feel old. As you can tell, I use the in-game engine for storytelling purposes in this video, and of course there's limitations. For the time though, they really provide you with a lot to work with and get the scene exactly how you want. Like a large variety of costumes from classic monster movie silliness to suits and fashion that go from the 1920s to the 1990s. It's more than you would think, so you can get a pretty good look for your actor. The set variety is pretty great too, especially when you count the additions from stunts and effects, which is where the expansion really shines. Some of my favorite include the green and blue screens, the miniature city set where you can dress your actors in costumes and have them prance in a large city. Also, as a side, the presentation for the sets is awesome. There's an attention to detail here, from the mirage of how every building is just a thin veneer, to how good they look on the ground level for the movies. Obviously they should look this good, but considering the dozens and dozens of sets on display here, there's not too many that look bad, or if any at all, and even those are just cratery Warzone sets that have their place. This is the kind of thing Lionhead was always pretty good at, getting tiny details right while not doing as well once you look at the whole big picture. Tool is really nice though, and you can even plan scenes for sets you haven't built yet, which can take a lot of annoyance out of getting the perfect look for your movie, especially for my purposes where I'm trying to adapt a real life story. You can do more than set dress and adjust mood. You can also change props, add weather effects, change the backdrop. It's good stuff, and there's not really another game with this level of attention to detail, or really trying to do the same thing. You can even get your looks closer with the Star Creator feature, which is a separate program where you can create an actor and then import them seamlessly into the game when needed, which allows for some much needed customization. Once you've made your script here and let your script writers make it, it's a pretty automated process. You place them in the casting building. If you've made your own script, you probably have already casted it, which will carry over the actors and directors. And then they have to rehearse the film, and once that's done, you place the film into the shoot it box and it begins. This is where the actors' moods really come into play. If they're not in a good mood, quality goes down and they will spend a lot of time in between takes coping with tantrums, drinks, and food, which will delay it. It's best to let them be, since forcing them to shoot the scene lowers quality, and a better delayed movie will make a better profit than a speedier made worse movie, which is a bit unbalanced, but more on that later. You can watch them shoot the scenes on set and zoom in to get a good view, which is pretty cool. Movies are pretty time consuming to make, obviously, and the more scenes the longer it takes, but you very rarely have to micromanage at this point, or at least there's often little benefit to doing so since it will get itself done and make you money. Focus on other movies or building sets and buildings, King. Once it's done, shooting it automatically moves it to the production house where you can look at review to get an early look at the score or just release it. As the game goes on, other aspects open up to the movie making process due to the incorporation of features of the expansion pack stunts and effects. This happens in the 1970s portion of the campaign, but here's a short list of what was added. The ability to watch a movie before you shoot it, be able to place your camera for shots anywhere, and lastly, the big addition, stuntmen and sets. This gives you way more creativity than you could get with the base game, which is why it's an essential get if you're gonna play this. You can even start the game in 1960 with an established studio if you're a veteran player. The stuntmen are a new type of actor who will do stunts for your actors, though your actors can do their own if you so choose, but it will go poorly. That's what the real stunt professionals are for, buddy. Stunts add a bit of dynamism to the shooting process. Stunts can fail and injure your stuntmen if they're too difficult, and it will make your movie worse. At least if you choose not to reshoot. You'll hear a bone crack when it happens too, and it's pretty gnarly.
It's a wrap.
Stunt scenes are better for larger blockbusters, so give your stuntmen a break when you're working on smaller films. And while the expansion isn't massive, the quality of life changes and new sets and scenes alone are worth the price of admission in my opinion. And since it comes in so late into the main campaign, you can take advantage of it when you're probably going to want to start to make your own movies anyways, so it's well integrated. Another smaller feature that comes into the game at this point, but isn't part of the expansion, is PR and marketing. And it's another annoying, tedious feature. PR allows you to build up hype for the movie ahead of time and requires you dropping your script, actors, and final film into the PR building and waiting forever for it to be finished, which gives it a little boost in the meter. Doing PR with the actors isn't too bad, especially when they filmed all their scenes ahead of time, but not being able to do other types of PR on the movie itself without interrupting some stage of filming is obnoxious. Marketing is just the box where you place your movies when you release it. The more little dollar signs, the bigger the marketing budget. But if you do too much marketing without PR or vice versa, it hurts your movie. I wouldn't even know how to get your PR that high for a movie, considering how long it takes and how little the meter fills no matter what you're doing. It's not really a fulfilling or great feature, and it coming into the game later is pretty annoying in my opinion. Still, let's talk about more good stuff. After a movie is made, whether through a random script from your scriptwriters or a custom-made one you put your own thought and time into, there's the addition of post-production, which you're probably familiar with the phrase, "we'll fix it in post." It's another set of tools to further customize your film. In this set of tools, you can edit your movies in various ways, and for 2005, it's pretty good, as I've said before. Here you can add fade transitions, which help your intro and outro of your movies to look a little more realistic and spiffy. You can shorten scenes with the split feature if you think it went on too long, or if you think the entire scene is junk, you can reshoot the one scene that you need after doing all your other editing, which is especially useful for a failed stunt. There's your standard playback option where you can play, pause, rewind, fast forward, and toggle the in-game technology effects on and off, and remove the Simlish mumbling your actors use. It's simple stuff. You can alter the title screen fonts and text in this area too, but the real good stuff here is the advanced settings. Oh yeah. These settings allow you to place subtitles since your actors all speak Simlish anyways. You can edit musical cues, add sound effects, even add your own custom music and sound effects if you have the .ogg or .wav files to put in the game's directory, which can be done relatively easily since the movies is alt-tab friendly and doesn't crap out when you do it. The most impressive feature in my opinion though is that you can add your own dialogue in-game and it will do a pretty decent job of lip syncing as long as your recorded audio is spoken clearly. You can even import some audio for it too, and the lip syncing will still work seamlessly, even muting the Simlish dialogue on its own. It's really neat stuff. This is also where you could upload your videos from the movie's site that has long been offline, unsurprisingly. I had uploaded a few back in those days as a little lad and would watch others, often nonsensical but sometimes really cool and novel movies made in this engine, like that aforementioned Ultimate Showdown remake. This was very early in the days of video being uploaded on the internet. Vimeo and College Humor had been around for a little while, and YouTube was a little-known site in its infancy in these days, with few noteworthy videos on it. So having a site for this stuff was super novel and pretty forward-thinking in a time like this. What was also forward-thinking was letting you download your videos to the .wav format so you weren't just limited to proprietary sites, which is a nice touch, as we're learning the promise of the internet being forever was born from a very optimistic bygone era. And much of the sites of this era are gone, even Lionhead's very own sites, or the articles journalists wrote about this very game. It's a shame. There is a campaign, as I said, but what makes this campaign special is it's not guardrailing you too much. The passage of time is expressed through news events parodying Tom Brokaw and a 1920s-style newsreader, making fun of American interpretations of news events, up to and including the Gulf War.
Armed forces are back in action in the Middle East, teaching that sand a really good lesson.
And it's the best use of humor in a Lionhead game. It can often be pretty clever with its ribbing of World War II and Vietnam and Gulf War's news coverage. The other source of humor comes from the radio host that, in between songs whose hosts range from a snobby anti-movie classical music fan,
Once in Shakespeare's Hamlet, you know, I played a rat scurrying around the Danish palace. Oh, I was so good. It's a wrap.
A tough guy anti-communist host whose wife divorces him, a hippie granola lady who rags against modern medicine,
I have here a new rubber sticker. My dogma got sick in my karma. I'll be giving that one to someone who can explain it for me.
and her son who takes over after she has a nervous breakdown.
The bad news is that Kristen won't be broadcasting for a little while. She suffered a breakdown caused by stress and by excessive drinking. And by eating too much of that sinister health food. But the good news is that I'm taking over for a bit. I'm her nephew, Hugh, from the other side of the Atlantic. I've never been a DJ before, but I don't think it looks very tricky, so it'll be fine.
It's really good and helps break the monotony of the same music and same announcements being blasted in your ear to catch your attention to something that's happening on the lot. As I said, the campaign ends around 2000, but you can play indefinitely, especially since you might not have unlocked everything. There are goals that get featured on diplomas with specific goals to reach, such as a 4-star movie and star, and you'll get a reward like a better script building or a new set, etc. It's a good way to structure your time and helps you engage with every aspect in a way you wouldn't if everything was unlocked, most likely. There are also award ceremonies every 5 years, as previously mentioned, and these awards grant you useful bonuses such as an actor award boosting any movie he's in, or one that makes relationship gains faster, or one that allows your movies to remain unaffected by the star's moods. It's a good structure for such a freewheeling non-narrative campaign. So that's about everything for the main campaign, but I want to tie up a few loose ends I haven't mentioned. First of all, like most Lionhead games, I like the soundtrack. It's got a good variety for the filmmaking and is a pleasant listen outside of that. I even found myself getting the song you're hearing right now, Melodramatic Love, stuck in my head. It can get repetitive, but it was never so bad that I felt the need to mute the music. I've talked about the impressiveness of the assets for the sets, but the rest of the game looks quite nice for 2005. And if it had native widescreen support, it would look even better, I imagine. But still, it's the artistry of the hard-working developers that make the movies as memorable as it is. It's a cohesive package in the vision of its character, it's pure silly camp, and the silly exaggerated animations on the lot and in the films and in the music would fit right in with any of the campy satire of any of the film in any of its eras I could find. And when you add on the comedic radio announcers and silly newscasts breaking up the songs, you realize it's a singular polished experience with the kind of character and artistry that many of its so-called spiritual successors currently lack. Maybe I'll do a video on some of those one day when they're a little more polished. The movies isn't lacking at all in its campaign, but I did complain that Black and White 2's expansion didn't have any skirmish or sandbox mode to its name, and I'm happy to say that the movies does, and it's exactly what I would want out of such a mode. You can set the start year, starting money, whether you want a lot or a pre-built studio. The years and items are limited until you beat the campaign, but honestly that's the main draw anyways, and the sandbox mode lets you choose from a variety of options to make your movie making process easier, such as actors always being in a good mood, movies not needing to be shot to be finished, no building decay, no stunt injuries, or even no stunts at all if you want. You can also unlock everything by changing the INI files, so if you just want to play around with the movie making tools, you totally can. And it's a good sandbox mode. It lets you push the limits of the games without pesky financials and other friction, and with the advanced movie maker, you can go as far as the scenes and sets will allow you, and even then, you can expand that with mods. Oh yeah, in addition to the sandbox mode, there was a pretty active modding scene that added new scenes and sets as well as quality of life improvements such as a larger lot size, more employees, and one that makes the relationships develop faster. I never really use mods for games on the first playthrough, especially when I'm reviewing it, because I want to talk about the vanilla experience. But I did use one which gave widescreen support. And it was not as seamless as I'd wanted it to be, but it still works better. You can find many of these quality of life and a lot of these cool prop set costume mods on themovies3d.com. So if you're a fan or just getting into it and some of these quirks of the game bother you, check that out. I won't judge you for having fun the way you want with your 20-year-old movie tycoon game. The Movies is feature rich and I've blathered enough about that. What you can do in it as a whole experience I feel is pretty great and novel and ahead of its time. As I've been making this video, I've noticed creators like Ambiguous Amphibian taking a stab at content for it, and it fits with that boom of wacky fun simulation YouTube creators. I think the term replay value is very overstated and more in the eyes of the beholder than we would like to believe, and I would play many a linear, non-branching experience like a Halo campaign over a mediocre branching story path game like some say the games of the Fable series are. The Movies being a simulation game makes it an inherently replayable experience, especially when it comes to the movie making aspect. While the variabilities are not earth-shattering like a proper city simulation game like City Skyline or a Paradox 4X game, they're still great, and with the many options in the Movie Maker, the sky is very nearly the limit. The lot management and actor managing aspect individually are pretty good too, and give you a lot to do while you're growing your studio and getting all the tech you need to really open up all the sets and options to make the little movies you want to make. But to play devil's advocate, if you don't find that part of the game fun or care at all about the game's gimmick and want to play this like a proper tycoon game where you can maximize your studio rank and challenge yourself to be the best studio head you can be, you are likely to be a little disappointed because that is not what the movies is best at. The lot customization is bare bones. There's no verticality or roundness to the paths you can place. You can place decorations and it'll look better, but the irregular shapes of the buildings make it hard to have both a good-looking and efficiently pathed lot. And because you can cheese a lot of the lot ratings, there's not much reason or motivation to really try. If you have enough builders, your buildings will never fall into enough disrepair to create a real nuisance. In fact, it's kind of impossible to fail. You're not going to lose money on a movie, period, or fail at all. And as long as you're releasing movies, you will not financially fail, even with highly paid big stars throwing tantrums the entire run. I've had movies that cost $500,000 to make still make a hefty profit, even with a low rating. Which is a shame. I feel like a lot of the appeal of simulation games in general is that just as quickly as you can grow things, you can also stack up a lot of problems that cause you to get into a financial pickle just as easily. The actors' mood mechanics are set up to delay movies and cause problems for you, and yet there's very little consequence outside of making a movie ratings lower. Meaning, you might as well just let your actors throw those tantrums or get drunk just so they could be in a better mood, since delaying the movie has little consequence. Keeping your actors happy and getting their ratings high is the most intensive part of the simulation. Besides the relationship tedium we discussed earlier, they can get pretty fussy about their trailers and salary as well as their image, and if enough of these situations are dire enough, they will threaten to quit, which is very tough to change their mind, basically requiring you to max out their mood in about a year, which is a very short amount of time in-game. And this can be especially dire if your best and biggest star leaves. This works for me and feels unique and fun, and they'll even do this in the middle of a movie, but it always feels like a rival star arrives just in time to replace it. Just never feels like you can bottom out in the movies, which is a shame. Games are better with consequence. If you can never fail, where's the real challenge? Where's the real reward? Where's my dopamine rush from overcoming it? I'm not even a guy who's obsessed with challenging games either. I felt the same about Black and White 1 and much of 2. It often felt like you couldn't fail. The studio and business side is flawed in this way, but I think when you're playing your first campaign, you won't really notice these flaws as much. It's only on the second playthrough that I realized this. It's clear this aspect really is secondary to the movie making by design. It's not quite shallow, and it's definitely not lacking in content, but it's still flawed. The actor managing is full of depth and often tedious, but it is funny when you have to send your actors into rehab because you made them eat too often in your failed attempts to get them a girlfriend. There's a lot of stories you can have from this game. It's a wacky, fun experience. I just think it could have been a truly great experience with a little more consequence. Still, my time with the movies is largely positive. The humor, the campaign, and the silly movies you make. The business management is engrossing enough to get lost in for a length of your playthrough. And the fun and depth-filled movie-making process really got me going. But it is the type of game that you get what you put into it. If you participate in its mechanics and push for the goals of the certificates, you will have fun. While Molyneux would call the movies a disaster due to the lack of playtesting, critics agreed with me that it was good, and the movies was well received, even winning a BAFTA award for simulation games in 2006. But it was a poor selling game that came out maybe a year too early when it could have been huge for YouTube, and this was disastrous for Lionhead. That's 2 underperforming games in a row, and they were stretched way too thin, with too many employees, too many games under development, and not enough capital to stay afloat, if the games were even going to sell enough to get publisher support. And Peter made the move to look for someone to outright acquire Lionhead. Ubisoft was one of the initial options, along with Microsoft, but Microsoft came through with the better offer out of fear of losing Fable as an exclusive series for Xbox and having future installments come out on the PlayStation 3. Many at the top were happy with the deal, citing Microsoft's handoff approach that probably saved Fable's troubled development. and they allowed freedom to develop what they wanted, though to make Lionhead a remotely attractive acquisition, 90 people's jobs were made redundant so that they could be let go. Some of this talent went on to create Little Big Planet, but many were forced to work in rooms where nothing was happening until the acquisition went through. This is the unfortunate side of the video games business. The deal would result in very little upfront payout to the employees and founders, with the rest tied to Lionhead meeting goals, which, yeah, I would be mad too if my job was made endangered for a buyout only to not get a fat lump sum, but instead have it dangled in front of my face. Years later, shareholder Andy Robson would recount that he had dedicated his life to the company. Quote, "I miss my kids growing up because I was in that office the whole time. Not because I was doing it for the money, but for the passion of making games. They forgot all that." Mark Webley would counter, "If somebody wished they got more money, and I wish I got more money." End quote. Still, many employees were excited for the support and security they thought the acquisition would achieve. And with this acquisition, a new era of Lionhead would begin. A very Fable-centric one indeed. So next time, we'll be looking at Lionhead's biggest success in this era, Fable 2. Thank you so much for your time. If you want to help the channel further, do the like and subscribe thing. If you don't, I still appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.